The title has already been well played out actually by our two previous speakers, reducing carbon, reduce cost. But rising to Mike's challenge, do you know the title could have been the value of working collaboratively within our industry, or using carbon to drive innovation. Many of my slides and much of what I would say would be the same regardless of what those titles were. So I am going to talk about our carbon story. In 20 minutes, says 1918 there, it's been reducing. There's a limit to what I'll be able to say. So out in the foyer, there is a leaflet that went up to 2013, and we will be updating it shortly, that actually gives 41 steps in our carbon journey up to 2013. So there's a lot more colour available out there. But just so I can grab people in the audience who might be thinking, what the hell is he talking about, and how do you reduce cost at the same time reducing carbon? This is data from our journey, starting with a hard start on the 1st of April 2010 through to 31st of March 2015, one of our asset management plan periods. And it shows the relationship of all the schemes that was delivered within Anglian Water over that period between carbon and cost. And this is embodied carbon, by the way. The only difference in the symbols is whether it's blue, green, red, etc., or triangle, etc., is whether it's above or below, and whether it's clean or whether it's dirty water. What you should note is the top right-hand quadrant is very heavily populated. And if you could understand the numbers that lay behind that, then over that period, we reduced the embodied carbon in the assets that we created on average by 45%, and the costs reduced by about 23%. In the final year, we got to 54% reduction in capital carbon. Now, what you need to understand is what lay behind that. And it's true, I joined Anglian in 2004, and it was a scary point that I joined at, because Anglian had decided that we were going to deliver our schemes through pure collaboration. And we created an alliance based on a collaborative entity with the principle of best man for the job. And we put the most rigorous and strong commercial model behind that basically said, to survive, you have to outperform the target cost or the affordability, which was 15% less than the previous period. So we defined what our sustainable future looked like. And that was the basis. We had a collaborative entity with strong leadership based on real commercial outperformance. 3 years in, I was thinking about, well, what's the next stage of this? So I've got my business head on, and I'm thinking about how can I incentivize and how can we innovate to take the next level of 15% cost reduction out of the assets that we create. And I sat in a meeting one day, and it was led by masters in our industry and academics on carbon. And what I learned in the first 5 minutes of that was that 80% of our capital carbon lay in the concrete and steel that we use. They then went on for another 55 minutes to tell me all we didn't know about carbon. And I said, at the end of it, I said, thank you, I got what I needed in the first 5 minutes. I know what I need to do now. I know where 80% of the problem lies. You can go and take 20 years to find the other 20%, but leave me now to work on that first 80%. And out of that came a principle that actually, if I can save that, then I'm saving natural resources. If I'm using less natural resources, I'm going to reduce cost. So there immediately became belief in 2008 that if we save carbon, we will save cost. And we had a collaborative vehicle to actually prove that concept. So it was about creating the next step in an affordable and sustainable generation of assets. The other thing you might say is, why the hell did he decide to focus on capital carbon? And this comes into what you're in control of versus what you may not be in control of. So my asset base in East Anglia has a £50 billion gross value. I'm able to spend, and I'm funded to spend, £1 billion per 5 years in maintaining those assets. You do the maths. So the bit that would like to influence, the £50 billion asset base, would take me 250 years. Or I can look at my carbon footprint and say, of those assets, 34% in 2008 was driven from the assets that we were building year on year. And I had a £1.5 billion per 5-year programme driving that equation. So if I could halve, in the bit that I was controlling, the capital carbon, I could take 17% out in 5 years of our carbon footprint. And that's exactly what we set out to do, and that's why we ended up with a 50% challenge. Now, why would we even be thinking along those lines? Mike talks about the global picture. This is the East Anglian picture. So in East Anglia, 28% of our region's below sea level, and we're talking about central estimates of 60 centimetre rise in sea level. It's the driest region in the country and getting drier because of the impact of climate change. It always is known for summer storms, which are getting stormier with the incidence of flooding. And it's one of the fastest growing areas in the country. And at the same time, we're under pressure to take 30% water less out of the environment because of the sustainability impacts of our take on the environment. But that growing population still needs its food, still needs its energy. So you can see the dilemma playing out, the global dilemma that we talk about, playing out in East Anglia. So it wasn't about, on the margin, I'll do a 10%. It had to be a big, hairy, audacious goal, and that's where the 50% came from. And if I'd really understood then what I understood now, the relationship between carbon and natural resources, and the fact that we're using 3 times in the UK our share of the planet's resources, then actually it probably ought to be in a 70% challenge. So my 50% expired in 2015, and guess what? We said our next step needs to go to 60 by 2020 and 70% by 2030, just to make sure we understand and are playing our part. And that's just one of several outcomes that Anglian Waters applied the same principles to and said there's some big, hairy, audacious goals that we need to live or die by out there. Now, this is where I give credit to our regulator. What enabled me to do this? Well, the regulator asked for PR the price review in 2009 for us to demonstrate that we were not putting unsustainable assets in the ground. He was afraid that his drive for efficiency was meaning that we would be building assets that were unsustainable in the long term and could become stranded. So we had to demonstrate that the assets that we were building were sustainable. And we were given a £26 per tonne CO2 shadow price to look at the impact, not only of the capital cost, but the cost of that capital carbon. In truth, at £26 a tonne, it made diddly squat difference to what you would build. And at that point, regulator said, job done, lost interest. But the point is, we had built a lot of information and knowledge to get to that point. We understood not only the unit cost of everything we might create, but the unit cost of carbon, its capital carbon and its operational carbon of everything that we might build. And you know what? Once you can measure it, you can manage it. So that was the fundamental that we had at that point. And then you look at something like, well, what have I learned from this? And I take a pipeline, you know, a lot of our bread and butter stuff is putting pipes in the ground, putting sewers in the ground, etc. In an open cut scenario on certain size of mains, only 11% of the carbon lies within the pipe and the pipe material. Guess what we're all talking about? We're all talking about pipe materials and new pipe materials, etc. And we were missing the point that what we need to do is focus on no-dig technologies. And if you focus on no-dig technologies, guess what? You can take half the carbon out, and if you get a real economies of scale, your costs come down. And that's exactly what we've done. So the back of my envelope calculation was, all I need to do is convert a 10% no dig to a 90% no dig, and have a supply chain that looks at relifing my above ground assets or moving to build off site and building lean in terms of the assets that we build. And when we've done that, that 50% will have dropped out. And that was the vision in 2008, 2009, and our big hairy audacious goal came out, published in 2009, just like Marks and Spencer's published their Plan A, because there was no Plan B. We did exactly the same. And the reason behind that is once you've done it, there is no way back. You have to move forward. You have to show leadership. So we had the models. We had the desire to create sustainability in our design. We created champions. We changed the culture. But above all, we put governance in place that meant we were only ever 1 week away from being able to message and re-message our intent. And we were very, very firm in holding to the premise that actually in year one, if we're going to get to 50%, you have to have schemes that are coming through at 30% capital reduction. And if they didn't, they got knocked back. They seriously got knocked back. The pyramid that we were talking about was, why build anything at all if there's an operational solution? If there isn't an operational solution, can you build less? If you can't build less, can you build differently? Ultimately, if you can't build differently, can you build with different materials? And if you can't do that, can you build off-site and use less of what you had previously done? So very clear hierarchy, very clear governance, very clear direction was set. This is the sexy stuff now. And the reason why I include the two at the top of the screen is quite clear. It took till November for the first team to bring a scheme that actually to not bring a scheme because they knew that it did not meet the carbon target. It had absolutely trounced the capital challenge and the OPEX challenge, but it did not meet the carbon target. So they said, I don't need to be told this isn't good enough. I know what happens if I go to governance. It'll get knocked back. So they took that back themselves. And when they came back, they'd knocked a further 3 million, 17 down to 14 million off the capital cost. And the net OPEX had fallen through the floor in addition to the capital target on carbon being at 60% reduction and the operating carbon following the energy demand. Absolutely brilliant, but very significant. That was 7 months in, teams were starting to do things for themselves because the stance that we'd taken was incommutable. Very clear, we stuck to it, signalled it, and adhered. In the drought of 2012, we've got a pumping station going in. That's a 20 megalitres per day pumping station. It was built off-site. It came clad in brickwork for a sensitive location in planning terms. And when it was connected up, the electric tails and the bit of plumbing, you imagine a 20 meg pumping station isn't just a bit of plumbing, so I joke a bit, even the fire exit line sign lit up above the door. It was that degree of completion. And when you do that, guess how much carbon drops out because you're using lean materials and lean processes. The no dig symbol at the bottom, we did get to 90% from a 10% starting point, simply because we stuck to our measures. And something that looks a bit like TARDISy, well it is, they're sampling cubicles, but they come ready-made. They come on galvanised steel bases that don't require concrete foundations. They come with solar panels in the roof, so they don't need electrical connections. They are self-powered, self-sustaining, pre-commissioned, fit and forget in a day. You do the maths on what that means for carbon, do the maths on what that means for construction and cost. Here's a slightly bigger asset. Many of you will associate rotating biological filters. Go on any rail journey, go on any river, and you'll pass many things like this. Some are round, some are square. They are very cost effective in the long term, biological entities. But they have quite a large footprint and they do self-destruct over a period of time. The mineral material breaks down through freeze flow, and because in the summer these expand and the material settles and then in the winter they contract, that causes the boundaries, whether it's concrete or whether it's brickwork, over time to break down. Contrast that with the low carbon solution. Yes, it does have a bit of steel in there, but we all need support. There's no concrete, it's a geotech base, there's no concrete foundation, it's modular, it's recycled plastic, and the media inside is based on stacked recycled plastic, so it doesn't move with that warming in the summer and freezing in the winter. And then you imagine what that means, not only for cost, but potentially the safety in construction of something like that. And here's a story of what happens if you are really clear and your supply chain gets it. So in the water sector, apart from the pipes, we build a lot of storage, and traditionally that's been concrete tanks. It doesn't matter whether it's for clean water or for dirty water or for process, parts of our process. We built concrete tanks, often square, sometimes circular. When the supply chain got hold of that, they said, why don't you think about using large circular pipes? We can knock those out cheaper. When the construction guys got hold of it, they said, rather than dig a square trench for something that might be 3 meters diameter, if we dig a circular trench, we really have taken less material out off site, and we've had to bring less of a hillside back in to fill that. But of course the concrete boys don't want to lose out on that then, because they see part of their business slipping. So we get a real uptick in precast concrete. It's been around for years, but adopting precast concrete as a solution, pushing the bounds of productivity and reducing carbon in the process through going for lower section sizes, never tested to the same extent. And now we're the first water company to actually go for SEM-free concrete. Initially in safe applications, but we will be testing how far we can push the boundaries of SEM-free concrete. So that's our journey, and it continues. So I showed you the graph through to 2015. This is now against the 2015 baseline going forward. Just look, it doesn't end when you get to 52, 53, 54%. We're still up in that right-hand quadrant. We're still reducing costs from a 2015 baseline, and we're still reducing carbon as we go from 50 through to 60. And all that has earned us the first accreditation against PAS 2080 that Mike mentioned. So back to my role in the Infrastructure Working Group in the Green Construction Board. I was part of the review of cost of construction in the UK. And so it was a no-brainer to me that when I was invited to work with the Green Construction Board, that because the Infrastructure Cost Review is all about leadership, collaboration, how you procure things and how you drive innovation, those same principles would have to apply and run through exactly what we needed to talk about in the Infrastructure Carbon Review. And it did, and that's why we pushed BIS to work with HMT and to publish it under the same banner as the Infrastructure Cost Review. And as soon as we'd done that, we got a lot of interest in it, as Mike said, and we got people signing up to the Infrastructure Carbon Review. But the immediate question was, if we like what that says, give us a clue. How do we go about doing that? And that was where PAS 2080 came about, because it's a PAS that explains what you would do, but they're constrained in terms of how they have to be written. So the guidance document is the one that adds the colour and says this is what you really need to know. And if anybody's out there and not on this list, this is the list of leading companies that are signed up to the ICR and are now seeking to embed the principles of PAS 2080 into how they go about delivering that lower cost and lower carbon. And we wrote PAS 2080 to apply equally to a constructor, to a materials provider, to a plant provider, not only to a designer and not only to a client. But what I have to say is, if the client gets it, and I liked Bill's starting point, you need to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. So if I as a client are simply throwing everything over the wall and saying, construction boys, it's your problem, that won't deliver it. If we join it together, if we show leadership, if we work collaboratively and join up that value chain, That's when the magic happens, and that's when you get into the 50%, the 60%, etc. And Past 2080 allows you to start on that journey by registering as businesses your interest, but hopefully that will lead to is businesses joining themselves together as a series of Past 2080 businesses going, we're here to deliver an even better outcome for infrastructure and for the client base of the UK. Thank you very much.